Okay, hello everyone. So allow me to finalize several settings here. Okay, and now let's get started. So welcome to our Student Net System interview sessions of Women in System. And today we will have our second episode with Professor Meng Jia. We are very honored to have Professor Meng Jiayan to join our panel and to share with us some of her insight in computer security and system research. And before we dive deep into the conversation, we will first talk a little bit about what the panel will look like. And the interview will be into three parts. The first 5 minutes will be the introductions, like what is our organization and who are our speaker and what's our topics today. And now, after that, we will move on to the interview topics, which is a very in-depth discussion about Meng Jia's research work and also her journey in both her PhD career and also her vision going forward. And then we will move to audience questions if there are any. And I do see a lot of audience has registered. So audience, if you have any questions, but if you don't have the access to the Zoom, you can also post them on the Slido to share this online Q&A. So we can vote for the questions that you find interesting, and the link is also posted on our website. Okay. So before we get it started, allow me to introduce a little bit about our organization. So Student Net System is a student-run organization which we started at about February this year. And we are now having 9 students from 5 different universities. And our focus is to help with other students, especially for students in computer system and architecture community, and democratize information and sharing wisdom and knowledge to inspire future leaders in this field. As always, we are very open and looking for new members. If you have ideas to join us, please feel free to reach out to us. You may check out our website about how to join. So today, we are very honored to invite our guest speaker, Professor Meng Jiayan. Professor Meng Jiayan graduated from UIUC 2019, and she's now undoubtedly one of the most successful researchers in the field of computer architecture security. And personally, I feel she's also one of the most delightful people, as is described by Lisa from WeArcPost as well. She's very smart, positive, and exceedingly wise beyond her years, and the kind of person who can turn a front upside down. So these days, she has been working on various topics, include hardware side channel attacks and also more on the system security side. So now we will hand the stage to Meng Jia to talk a little bit more about herself. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much for all these nice words. I feel like I'm not as good as what Lisa described, but I will try my best to answer as many questions as possible. How shall I proceed with questions here or?
Yeah, sure. I think we can proceed with the slides and we will dive into the questions, and basically we will go into the interview about this. Okay, so before going to the interview, let me thank all the members, which are not all listed here, but especially Suyash and Varun for helping with the Twitter websites and also the backup and moderation, and all the other group members in student and at system for providing the support. Okay, so now let's go into our curated questions. So the first part, we'd like to discuss a little bit more about Professor Menjia's path into computer science and into the specific research topic as hardware security. I think this is not a very common topic back at the day when you are studying. I think basically most of the researchers at that time are probably interested in AI, computer vision. And could you tell us a little bit more about how you decide to go against the grain and focus on the subject of computer security?
So good. I may tell you something a little bit disappointing that when I started my PhD, I think AI was ramping up, but it was not dominating the field. I think maybe around the third year or fourth year of my PhD, it is really dominating. But in the first year of my PhD, maybe some people already see the trend. But me, as a first year PhD student, I didn't see the trend. So I was not influenced by that, not because I'm so clear and having a clear vision. It's more about I was not aware of that. But I think, let me put it in this way, even in the first year of my PhD, I have very little knowledge and the vision about the community and the field. My advisor, Joseph Trillos, maybe many of you have already known that, kind of mentioned that it's not really the smartest idea to follow the hottest topic. He is a very experienced researcher, and he has seen so many hypes and downs of research topics in the community. So according to his experience, it's not really a good idea to just follow a topic because it's hot. If you want to jump in a topic, it's really trying to understand the reasoning behind it, whether you are really interested in anything, insights you see, rather than just it's because it's hot. And another thing I want to mention is that I also want to be very honest. I would say that in the first 1 or 2 years in the PhD, due to the limited vision or view side of the community, many often the topic of the students was chosen by the advisor. So this also applies to myself. So the big direction of working on hardware security is decided by my advisor. He has this vision. He thinks security is important, even though when I heard this, I didn't know why it is important. I kind of trusted him, so I just go and went and explored. I took an undergrad computer security course, even though I took some very lightweight course when I was an undergrad student, but that was not sufficient. So I actually took the undergrad and grad version of computer security course at UIUC. And then I find, oh, I'm really interested in that. And I'm really excited about combining computer architecture with security.
That's really cool. Thank you for sharing with us your thoughts. I think this is a general philosophy that basically maybe it's better to follow your interests and do not think too much about what's hot in the field, and follow what you really are interested in could be the best way to go forward.
Yeah. And in terms of how I start my research in hardware security, it could be a much longer story. Even though my advisor told me to work on hardware security, it was a very big direction. Hardware security is big. And you know that my PhD thesis is about side channels. So at that time, I actually decided to work on side channels almost the second semester of my third year. I was exploring a lot of hardware security problems, but I was always asking myself, it seems to be the case, even though we are trying to do some hardware security work, many of the work at that time were really hardware support for some security mechanism. So you have some security mechanisms implemented in the software layer or proposed as software layer, and you are trying to accelerate it. So you propose corresponding microarchitecture optimizations to accelerate it. So I was always thinking that if the hardware security research is like this, then it seems like we are just we are in the downstream of the research, because we are addressing some problems well started by software people, and we already see the software solutions and trying to replace it with some hardware optimization. So I was always questioning myself whether that is the most interesting hardware security topic. And then I heard about the side channel work. I heard it multiple times. One is presented by there's a reading group, something like that, and one of the students presents something about a side channel. And I also attended ISCA 2014 or so, and I met Fang Fei, who's a research scientist at Intel now, and she was doing fantastic work at that time on side channel, and I chatted with her. And that kind of made me think side channel is a problem rooted in hardware. So it's a fundamental problem rooted in the hardware rather than rooted in software. And that just got me very excited. And I do want to work on that, because the different characteristics of side channel compared to the other security problems I have seen before.
Yeah, that's very cool. I think it certainly requires a lot of reading and insights into choosing your own area, and having a unique take on hardware side channel is very interesting, especially I think there are so many recent attacks on hardware side channel, and it's becoming more and more important. So I was wondering, as a hardware security researcher, how do you usually come up with very good ideas about, okay, how do we do the attack on the new architecture? And is there a secret sauce of the methodology you can do this type of research?
I would say it's a bit mixed. I don't think there's any secret. Honestly, I realized that reverse engineering real hardware processors and trying to conduct an attack on a real processor is quite challenging, and many times it requires a lot of experience. It's not pure science, honest. Sometimes requires you to have some experience to debug the processor. I think I was quite excited when I was a PhD student, trying to play with these computers and find some features that were not known before. I mean, we learned all these features in the undergrad or graduate level computer architecture courses. But when we reverse engineer this architecture, we realize, okay, Intel, AMD, or some other big players of the companies are designing them differently, and they must design for a specific reason, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, and many times it's often start with some weird observation of the traces, and it's so weird, and you need to debug to realize that, to figure out whether it is because a bug in your code, or it's really because hardware was designed in some way that you cannot understand, or something that doesn't match in a textbook. I would say some people like this process, some people do not like this process. It's always cool to find a vulnerability or find some structures people do not know, but also sometimes you will see you didn't find it. I would say designing new attacks on real processors is slightly different from doing the traditional style of computer architecture research, where we try to find the performance or energy, the bottleneck, and then you use a scientific or principled way to analyze it, then come up with a solution. Sometimes finding new attacks is like searching a needle in the ocean, something like that. It depends on how difficult it is. So I usually ask a student to especially as years goes by, nowadays finding new attacks on real process becomes a relatively crowded area. I would try to suggest to my students, or maybe the other students who want to jump on this topic, is that first, trying to just try some existing POC, like proof of concept attacks on real processors, to just get an idea how difficult it is to get an attack going on a real processor, and compare the difference between theory and the practice is very useful experience. And second, maybe do not try to blindly finding new vulnerabilities, because very likely you spend a lot of time and you may not find something interesting. Try to start thinking about new insights or ideas first. For example, our Pacman attack, recently published in the ISPA conference. That attack is, if you look at the side channel aspect of it, it's really a pure Spectre style attack. While the key innovation is really that if you combine side channels, microarchitecture side, which is a hardware security problem, with memory corruption vulnerabilities, which is a software problem, you get a new threat model and you could explore things differently. That big idea kind of drive the project rather than a specific new variation of spec execution attacks. That would be some advice I give to people who want to jump on attacks, because it started being crowded.
Yeah, thank you so much for the insightful suggestions. And I think the way of thinking about how to come up with an attack is definitely very important, and your suggestions can be very valuable for the new researchers. And actually, I think one of the other papers I read that you published in ISCA was also pretty helpful and also very inspiring in terms of how you did a clarifying analysis of machine learning assisted side channel attack, which is also a very interesting angle. Maybe would you mind tell us a little bit more about your vision about how to bridge machine learning based attacks versus traditional heuristic based attack approach?
Great, very nice question. So machine learning techniques, I view machine learning as a double-edged sword. I think in many fields, machine learning are considered like that. So basically, as we all know, machine learning is very powerful and it's very easy to use. That's another strong benefit, that it's so easy to use and it's so powerful and effective. And especially when applied to side channels, it's so good in finding correlations between signals and some symbols corresponding to the signal. In that sense, people just extensively use machine learning to do post-processing of side channel traces. So the problem it comes up with that, yes, it's powerful, so it can very quickly demonstrate whether you have a vulnerability or not, whether there exists some interference between processes in a very complex system or not. Well, the limitation is that even if you find these correlations, there exists interference. Given the modern system is so complicated, you do not know which point of the system is the interference introduced. And eventually we find that actually analyzing an attack and finding the point of the leakage is quite challenging. Turns out that the community is very focused, primarily focusing on attacks and defenses, like the raising arms, and has been discussed for many years. Very understandable. But our work in ISCA just realized that some work, like we analyzed a state-of-art attack, which claimed to be a cache occupancy attack. And then through our analysis, we find even if you remove the cache accesses, the attack still go through, and the attack even work better. And all the detailed analysis leads us to the conclusion that the signal actually comes from the system interrupts and interfere with the CPU throughput of the attacker's core. I kind of think that it's, even though we only showed one case study, but the insights and the lesson we learned from paper is much more general, that when we use machine learning techniques for any side channels, we should be very careful for doing the detailed system analysis of it. And honestly, I realized that nowadays, as side channel becomes such a hot topic, and many people are knowing all the fundamental mechanism of that. The fundamental mechanism is as simple as long as you have resource contention, you will have information leakage. So this a statement is simple enough, and the challenge is that in the complex system, where is the resource causing the contention and the leakage? And I don't think the community has been spending a lot of effort trying to study this, because attack people trying to find any potential interference, no matter where it is introduced. Defense people take a very well-defined problem, say cache. Okay, if cache is a place where the interference is introduced, let's just propose some cache defense mechanisms. So because of this, the analysis of the root cause of attacks being neglected, and that is a problem. And I would hope that more people work on this direction, actually.
That's a very good insight. Thank you so much for sharing. Yeah,
we could form it as explainable machine learning attacks, etc. So you want to explain what exactly happening with this black box machine learning technique. Sorry for add to that.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, exactly. I feel like nowadays most of the work, such as machine learning for security or machine learning for system scheduling or other system performance optimization techniques, there is always a question about, can we think more fundamentally about understanding the interpretability of these black box methods. And yeah, I think that's a very good point. Cool. So now let's move on to our second topic. I think the second topic is about keep motivated in the minority group. So as we all know that as a female researcher, especially for a female researcher in the topic of very specific niche in computer architecture, I was wondering, how would you build up this minority community? And could you share with us some of your experiences? Yeah.
I would say that I'm not the most active player, but I always try to encourage female students just try to be more confident and try to talk to more people attending conferences. When I was a PhD student, I actually very actively attended this women and minority workshop, which is usually co-located with Micro. I think they are continuing doing this this year with Micro in Chicago. So if you happen to be able to attend that workshop, try to attend. I actually also want not just the female or minority students to attend, but also male students should, or the faculty should also attend. I remember there's, I think that must be 2019, if I remember correctly, just before pandemic, the last time I attended the women and the minority workshop in person, multiple male faculty attended, such as like David Brooks and Trevor, and they actually shared a lot of nice opinions. So I would say this community, like giving female is the minority, doesn't only require efforts from female students, it also requires the involvement of the male faculty, male students. So I think I see that some male students attending this workshop. So try to support your lab mates if possible, that would help. And one thing I learned when I become faculty is really that there exists a diversity, not only like the gender-wise, but also mental diversity across people, in the sense that it's common that female and male students are thinking differently, and there are many other factors can influence people think things differently. Try to respect each other is very important. Try to be aware there exists such diversity, and try to be nice to other people is very useful. And for all the workshops, like the MAD workshop, I think as students, the only thing you should do is just get involved. Well, for example, one night, I was the co-organizer of the MAD, like Micro Architecture Attack and Defense workshop this year. And as an organizer, I really want more people to get involved and to participate in our workshop and attended our talks, participate in our, like we have a capture the flag competition, a small competition hosted together with the workshop. I was just so excited to see people getting involved. And the more you involve, the more people know each other, and then I hope that eventually we will not see minority becomes an issue because people just treat us very similarly, and be aware this mental diversity exists for anyone, no matter whether you are female or male. Just any people who have different background will have some mental diversity. Then we will, in the case that if we in the community, we do not need to keep bringing up this minority problem, meaning that the problem is addressed already. So just to try to be confident and try to get involved in as many workshops and try to let people know what kind of person you are is the general approach I navigate through this workshop. I have to admit that when I was a PhD student, I was quite intimate, and because I'm very intimate, and some of the friends actually sometimes talk to me that I do not need to be like that. They actually try to work me through. It's difficult. Didn't work out. So I understand even now I'm talking about, oh, try to attend a workshop. It may still be a bit difficult for you mentally to really take this into action. Then I highly suggest this Meet a Senior Architect program started by Joe Emmer, and now I think also run by CASA, the Student Association. I think that is really a nice program in the sense that I know it's a bit awkward talking to people at conferences, just to have these cold conversations. It's awkward. No one likes that, honestly. You may see some others like it, but no, yeah, really no. So leverage to Meet a Senior Architect program, because they give you the chance to just have these one-on-one meetings with some professors. You know, they commit to talk to you with for 15 or 30 minutes, and just leverage this opportunity and try to get to know each other better. Start with that, and then you realize that actually finding someone, you know, and getting involved in this workshop is not too difficult. Okay. Sorry, I talked too much. In addition to that, I know that usually if you have some work in a conference already, like some paper published, you feel a bit more confident, so it will be more natural for you to talk to others. In case that you are in your early 2 years, like it's very common that for the first 2 year students, they do not have a paper published. We have the YARC workshop for young computer architecture students. I have been co-organizing this workshop for 2 years, and we are planning to do it again in 2023 with US+. It's a tentative plan. So this really is a venue for very junior PhD students who do not have a top conference paper yet. And we try to provide this forum or venue for them to get a chance to connect with peers and so connect with senior faculty to provide a one-on-one mentoring opportunity between senior faculty and this junior student. So there are a lot of opportunities, and it really depends on whether you can leverage that or not.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for sharing all these pointers. And I think we may move on to the next question. Sure. How do you measure success or progress as a graduate student, as a professor, and as a mentor? I think one of the quotes I read from the WeArc post from Lisa, which is quite inspiring, is that you said time is not measured in numbers of papers, and it's really measured by how much you have grown and how much you have learned. So I think to have that mindset requires a lot of wisdom, and also probably you have gone through this process about thinking about your research direction very deeply. So could you maybe share with us a little bit more about how you keep this mindset in mind?
Sure. I'm always happy to share this my own experience, and this piece of statement is really because I know many PhD students went through similar very tough and struggling process of getting no paper published in a period of time and just feel like, okay, I'm not good enough, start self-doubting, and then think I'm not good enough to be in the program, or I'm not good enough, that's why I could not accomplish as much as my peers, etc. And I want to shout out to everyone that this happened to like a very high percentage of PhD students I could not get the statistics, but I would say the ratio is really high according to the people I have been talking to. And many of these people have become very successful in our community. So even for these very successful people, they have been going through the same process, maybe experience the same feeling as you are experiencing now, a feeling that I'm not, myself is not good enough. I would say I know that it's very easy to say rather than really internalize this, but I will just share my experience as a proof. So when I was starting my PhD, my first project was completely not successful. It took me 2 years, and actually I was not even the first author. I was a co-author, and we, even as a co-author, I was pushing with the first author together really hard for the project for 2 years, and it was not successful. The paper, eventually the paper came out after 2 or maybe 2.5 years, submitted, not come out, it was submitted. And then it was a series of rejections, just keep being rejected and then resubmitted. And that paper came out even later than my first author came out, because my first author, I started work on my first lead author paper, actually in the end of my 3rd year. That paper even come out later than that. So that was, of course, not a rewarding progress and not a happy experience. But if you ask me to reflect back, I would very honestly tell everyone that I learned the most from my first project, which was not that successful, but I learned the most, because really that is the project brought me to, from a person who know very little about research, who didn't have a solid engineering skill set, playing with simulators, and didn't know how to navigate through paper submissions, plan time accordingly, and doing rebuttal and writing the paper, structure the paper, all these things. I knew nothing when I started that project, and I learned all the stuff in that project. Most importantly, I think the fundamental issue is that of that paper being not that successful is that we didn't do a very thorough literature review. So the review kept complaining that the paper is a bit is very incremental. And on one hand, partially I agree with the review, because we didn't do the literature review thoroughly enough. So we also didn't have the skill set to justify how we are, how big we are different from the other work. That is also something I learned from my first project. And because of that project, I know I need to definitely avoid it, because if you do not do the literature review thorough enough and you start jumping on the project too fast, the time you spend will just be paying and eventually result in paper rejection. So that is a very important lesson, and you may have been reminded by others. It's important to do literature review, but it's much clearer and much thorough and deep if you learn it from experience. So that's kind of the results. I would say if you treat all the first, do not really define the failures as no paper publication as failures. If the project didn't go well, try to summarize and reflect why it didn't go well. Maybe that is a learning opportunity. That is an opportunity for you to learn from experience rather than just from what people said, told you. That's my story. And because of that story, I firmly believe it matters. And even for when I'm mentoring my own students, I sometimes think it's worthwhile to take longer time on something if you think that is necessary for you to learn. And if that thing take a longer time to learn and you do not publish paper in the short term, don't worry, as long as you think that is something worthwhile to try, and that is something that you think would benefit you in the long term. So in summary, you should look into long term rather than the short term output of the paper numbers.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing with us your philosophy, and I definitely resonate with it a lot. And thank you for being vulnerable to share with us your experience. Yeah. So I think one of the questions that comes up to me is about this optimal stopping point in research. Sometimes when you are trying out different ideas, you might think about whether or not you wanted to continue diving deeper, or you wanted to see another slightly different approach or direction. So I was wondering, do you have any insights or suggestions regarding this?
It's very difficult, I would say, because I think it's really about the balance.
Right.
In the first 2 years, obviously, you have to see more things enough. If you do not investigate enough and you just decide something, it does seem to be a very smart decision process. But if we spend all the time just investigating and exploring things without focusing on something, eventually it may not come with a good solution, a good outcome either. So there must exist a balance. For me, for me, I think no one would say they have the best decision process. For me, I'm very interest driven in the sense that once I find this one, I want to push it to my limits somehow, and then see how it goes. Because research is something, it takes time to accumulate. What do I mean by that? I mean, your understanding and your vision about a specific research topic comes over time. Of course, the time is the time that you work on that specific topic. It is often for me, I had a very nice conversation with Chris Fletcher when I graduated from my PhD program. And I told him that I realized that my research taste increased over the last 1 or 2 years. And his reaction that, of course, if your research taste does not increase, there is an issue. So I think the sense is that after that conversation, I feel like it's so clear. I would hope that my research taste and research understanding about the specific problem keep evolving over time. If that stop evolving, I would say maybe it's the time I switch. Now, that's my criteria for now. Rather than anything else should be explored, because there are so many topics, and every topic there are some people exploring that. Of course, you need to spend some time to figure out what is my interest, but it could be possible that you are interested in many things. In that sense, anything that you are interested in could be, just pick one of that could already give you a very happy life, rather than pick all of them. And try to keep pushing that when you see whether you have evolving understanding of the topic, and that is the rewarding part of it. And if you see, oh, I stopped learning new things, then maybe that's a time to switch a bit. Unless you become a faculty, you can have more students exploring multiple directions. But I think for PhD students, I mostly promise them to focus on one thing at a time, or maybe co-author or collaborate with some others on the side, not primarily. For most people, of course, there are some exceptions, but for most people.
Yeah, these are great advice. Thank you so much for sharing. Yeah, now let's move on to the third part, which is about the future. And with that, we have the following questions. So I had one of the questions, which is about your vision on your area of hardware security and system security going forward. What are some of the big questions or key challenges in this area? And what are some key characteristics of being a good researcher in this area? And the second is, what's the vision for your lab going forward? Yeah.
Very good questions. They are actually very difficult questions. So I would say, just as mentioned from just now, that I said my research understanding is keep evolving over time. So my answer will be just a snapshot of my current understanding, and it will change, who knows, in the next few years. My sense of like the hardware security system going forward is that I'm really happy that it becomes a really popular and hot topic nowadays. I mean that a lot of people are joining the efforts. I would say maybe two things. It's also learned from my past experience. First is that I hope that we could do more work rather than microarchitecture only attacks and the defenses, because I would say the microarchitectural side channel attack itself is, especially traditional microarchitecture side channels, are well understood at the design level. So it's more about the implementation. How could you implement it properly? A very challenging part is that we could definitely design a secure RISC-V processor because it's open source. However, the closed source nature of many chips like Intel AMD processors leave so many holes and vulnerabilities there. How can we work with this closed source system, developing tools to instead of manually figuring out the vulnerability, how can we systematically, automatically find these vulnerabilities rather than relying on all the manual efforts would be something I'm quite interested in. And also not only just the microarchitecture only attacks, like the Pacman work, we are trying to combine different threat models because a lot of this Spectre meltdown, you see that they are really playing in the middle of software and hardware. That is why the problem being amplified, and that is why the problem cannot be merely addressed in the hardware or software without big performance or extensive system redesign. I would be very interested in how to extend the threat models we are currently traditionally thinking about, and also how to explore the interface in software. So that is the attack aspect. And from the defense aspect, I think during my PhD, I did a lot of defense work. I do see a problem of the current defense papers in the community. I would say the challenge doesn't lie in coming up with a new defense mechanism. The challenge lies in, with a defense mechanism, how do you justify or clearly demonstrate its security property? It's just so ad hoc and unclear how secure the defense mechanism could be. Even including some of my PhD work, they justify some scenarios, more like case-by-case study, etc. So there's some work. So I told my student we emphasize a lot on doing security analysis. From my perspective, I think doing a better security analysis of a system could help you design the defense mechanism better, because it will help you to figure out some corner cases. So, for example, we had some work in Micro 2019 or 2020 about 2020, I think, about how to systematically analyze randomized caches. And we also have this analysis work about a bigger fish, how to analyze machine learning based attacks to really find the root cause of the attack. I would really hope we could try to, and this analysis, I don't think they are actually quite, honestly, I would say they are relatively preliminary. And in many of these analysis, we refute some common understandings of how attack works or how defense works. I would be very excited to do more work on the analysis side, using this analysis technology to help people to design better defense mechanisms. That would be something I'm trying to focus on. In terms of my lab, if it was a job interview, I was trying to come up with very concrete answer to that. Well, for now, I would say that, this is the 2.5 years after I started my job. I would say I learned so much in the last 2.5 years, especially when working with very different people. I think during my PhD, I also work with some people, but not that many. And you can kind of have very loose collaborations rather than using mentor, students, etc. So I realized the students themselves play a very important role. I could help in the first or second year when they are some of them maybe a blank page, like how I started my PhD. So at that time I could try to involve a lot, but later it's better for the students to have their own ownership of the project and try to explore by themselves. I gradually try to give more freedom to my students. So in that sense, many often I learn some things from my students, and they are taking the project was the direction they are taking for. I think my vision is just as I mentioned that for attacks, I want to have more automatic tools, and for defenses, rather than focusing on defense, I want to develop some more analysis technology to drive them. So I kind of hint on this and give these insights to my students, because I have been, the only advantage maybe I have over them is I have relatively longer experience working on this topic, but they actually have an advantage than me in that sense that since that they are having more time working on each things. So I would say the future will fall in this big scope, but the detailed directions will be driven by them.
Yeah, these are great. Thank you so much. I think it's actually a very good time for us to move on to some of the audience questions on Slido. And actually, one of the questions that echoes with your big picture and vision about more systematic and principled way to do defense. One audience also asked that, what's your opinion on using techniques like formal verification to identify potential attack surfaces? And from my perspective, I'm also curious, how do you think about some fuzzing techniques and yeah, things like that?
Great. So definitely they are very useful techniques. I would say at MIT, very nice that my neighbor, Adam Chapala, he is also an expert on formal methods. I've been learning a lot from him in the last 2.5 years. So the challenge, I would say, the formal methods is really about, I think there's a lot of things that computer architects can do in utilizing formal methods technique to verify these designs. I would say there's still a lot of challenges in the sense that how do you formulate the problem, and many of these formal methods techniques, they are not scalable, and how to apply it to the real design or some abstract design is a key thing. Another tricky thing would be we could solve the problem in 2 levels. First, that when I talk about defense mechanism in the community, actually these defense mechanisms are fairly complicated, and you can see in these papers these defenses are never being implemented in RTL. Okay, so they are actually implemented in Gen 5, and in Gen 5 you can obviously hack how things work. Everyone knows that. So I honestly think that there's some fundamental issues about how we model computer architecture, like how do we model computer architecture defenses. If we model them in a way like Gen 5, honestly, it's very difficult to be verified properly, because in Gen 5, who knows what hacking are doing. You may even not write Gen 5 to represent a valid design. So that may be a more fundamental problem to solve rather than how to apply formal methods, because before you define and model the microarchitecture in a specific way, you may not have a good intermediate representation for the formal verification to be applied on. Or you can apply to RTL, but as you see, many of the defense mechanisms will not even implement RTL for that due to many reasons. Primary reason may be complexity. While still there's some techniques, there's a lot of work in the community already doing stuff in RTL, but I guess they also have the complexity issue that they do not scale that well. But there's some active work in both the computer architecture domain and also the circuit level people who do publish paper in DAG and DATE. They actually did a lot of work. In terms of fuzzing, I would say that is so fuzzing, as we all know, it's actually similar to machine learning. It's a black box. It's something like a black magic. It works very effectively. The idea is very simple, and it's very effectively can find many things while you do not know the coverage. And as we all know that fuzzing is becoming a standard in these big software companies to test their software. Any version of software being released will be tested using fuzzing at this moment. Many fuzzing stuff are running on this cloud for ensuring our next release being secure of the system, etc. And being so effective, I would be very positive that we can use fuzzing to find some new things. Only issue I would see that after reviewing some fuzzing paper, I found that a lot of these fuzzing techniques, they find duplicated vulnerabilities, which we are already known before, because we already know all these vulnerabilities in the architecture. We haven't fixed them yet. Okay, in that sense, the awkward situation with fuzzing is that with this vulnerable in various ways architecture, how can we find new problems rather than these problems we already know? That is an awkward situation, not because fuzzing techniques are not good enough, It's more about that we haven't fixed the bug yet. For example, when you test the software use fuzzing, you find a bug, you will patch it, then you're trying to find new bugs. You are not trying to find bugs with a very buggy system. Honestly, currently the process is very buggy in terms of side channel, etc. So that's the tricky part. But of course, I think it's very promising directions how to figure out to do effective fuzzing and find the interesting and unknown bugs is a very good direction.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. Yeah, I totally agree that having an effective method to find security vulnerability while also not giving too much overhead on the real defense mechanism is probably very challenging questions. And there's always a big problem about how to balance security and performance. They are always seems to be at odds in the computer architecture or computer system. And when you are designing a new architecture, how to give them provable security while also ensuring high performance in a principled way. I think this is a very interesting question to me. So I was wondering, Wenjia, do you have some thoughts on this line?
Yeah, can I see the question somewhere? It's a long question, no? Is it a long question?
Yeah, I think, let me see. Okay, this was not clickable. So it's also on the.
Oh, great.
Yeah, on the slide. I think we shared it on the, yeah, on the chat. Yeah.
Obviously, very tough question. very, very difficult problem. How the approach of designing a secure and high performance processor. I would say that the computer architects have been known to be very good in designing high performance computers. We have so many slides and lectures on how to come up with all these tricks and interesting ideas to improve the system performance. From my perspective, I would say the challenge really lies how to make things more secure. Once you make things more secure, you could apply many tricks. I think the fundamental issue here is that many of these vulnerabilities we have seen is really rooted in the optimizations we put into the architecture. In that sense, I will say something, but I don't think it will be the final solution. It's really that when we design the performance optimizations, try to be aware of the security features of it, or try to distinguish between the secrets or the public data in your program usually. But nowadays we are actually generally designing general purpose processors. If we really keep security in mind, we may want to go across the system layers to figure out what is a secret, what is not a secret, and try to embed a security feature across layers rather than just put it in the system layer and let the architect do whatever they like. That will require to change the interface between software and hardware. Maybe that is a direction challenging and will take a long time because any hardware software co-design takes time. Rather than that, I would say I would not come up with any very clear principled approach of doing optimizations for secure systems. If there exists one, people may already start working on that. So not a easy question. It's quite challenging.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you so much, Wenjia. I think that's a really fruitful and inspiring conversation. And thank you for sparing your time for sharing with us all of your knowledge. And it's already past 6, so we will call it a day for the interview and to do some preview of our next speakers. We will have Natasha and Irene lining up in our interviewing sessions. And thank you so much for joining us, for all the audiences, either on Zoom or on YouTube. And the recording of this panel will be uploaded shortly. So please check out our website for updates.
No
And
problem.
this is pretty much it. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Mhm.
Thanks for organizing. Bye-bye.
Yeah, thank you, Manja. Thank you, Varun. Hi, Varun. Thank you so much for the help. Yeah. I cannot hear you very clearly, but yeah, just
I think it's still streaming. That's what I'm saying.
oh, okay, yeah, I have already stopped the recording, so I guess we can end the meeting now. Mhm.